spiritual food for thought.
Welcome back to Spiritual Food for Thought, and I thank you for joining me once again. In this episode, I'm going to talk about the heart and bring a couple things to the forefront of the matter. The heart often represents your inner being and who you truly are. And there's a couple different types of hearts that we can have. A lot of people are familiar with the concept of circumcising your heart. So a lot of times, if you just do an online search about circumcised heart, Romans 2 is going to pop up, and to many it seems like a New Testament concept. But it was not so from the beginning. A circumcised heart was what God always wanted for his people to have, and there's a little more to it than you may realize. Back in Deuteronomy 10, verse 16, there's an exhortation, "Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart. Be no more stiff-necked." In chapter 30, verse 6 of the same book, we read, "And the Lord thy God will circumcise thine heart and the heart of thy seed, to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live." In Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 4, we read, "Circumcise yourselves to the Lord, and take away the foreskins of your heart, ye men of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem, lest my fury come forth like fire, and burn, that none can quench it, because of the evil of your doings." The evil of their doings was their flesh. It wasn't obedience to God, it was sin. The desires of the flesh are what we're supposed to circumcise spiritually out of our life. Yes, there is a physical circumcision, but it's the heart of the matter that is crucial. It is absolutely crucial, and it's something, as I've shown from multiple witnesses in the Old Testament, that God always had a desire for. Now, if we think about circumcision, circumcision, of the heart, there's a circumcision of the flesh. Well, what do we know about what God says about our heart? He often talks about people being stiff-necked, rebellious, hard-hearted. Listen to these passages from Ezekiel. Ezekiel 11:19. "And I will give them one heart, and I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take away the stony heart out of their flesh, and give them a heart of flesh." Taking away that hard, stony heart, and putting in a heart of flesh. This is important. Likewise, in Ezekiel 36:26, we read, "A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you, and I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh." There's a couple things I want to show you about stone and flesh coming up in just a moment, but let's look at this. God reveals more of his purpose in context here. So before I move on, I want to make sure to read this. Ezekiel 11:19, "And I will give them one heart, and I will put a new spirit within you, and I will take the stony heart out of their flesh, and will give them a heart of flesh, that they may walk in my statutes and keep my ordinances and do them, and they shall be my people, and I will be their God." Okay, think about that. The reason of the stony heart being removed, that hard heart being taken away, and God putting in a heart of flesh, is to walk in his statutes, to keep his ordinances, and to do them. Not just to keep them like they're neat to have around, but to literally do them. This is going to get tied back into that circumcised heart in a minute, but I wanted to show this in context. If we look at the other verse I mentioned, Ezekiel 36:26, and read that in context, "A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you." Remember that new spirit too, okay? "And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and will give you a heart of flesh, and I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you shall keep my judgments and do them." The reason that God would give people his spirit is that they would walk in his statutes, keep his judgments, and do them. That is where this heart of flesh comes into play. So let's think about something else for a moment. If we look at the prophecy of the new covenant from Jeremiah 31, and I would recommend you read this, verses 31 to 34 at least, and consider, because this is the new covenant prophesied of. Okay, this is the new covenant that we're partakers of when we become joined unto Israel, as Paul talks about in Ephesians 2. Here, the verse I want to isolate and look at for a moment before I bring a few things to the forefront is verse 33. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. So, again, writing the law on the heart. Do we know something about how God can write? Do you remember the 10 Commandments? They were written in stone. That means that God can write in stone, but He doesn't want you to have a heart of stone. He wants you to have a heart of flesh. Why? Because He wants you to have a circumcised heart. You cannot circumcise a stone. You circumcise flesh. Therefore, He takes out the heart of stone, He puts in the heart of flesh, and that can be circumcised. And when it is circumcised, it's going to walk in obedience to what God has declared. He puts a heart of flesh in them, His people, His believers, and He gives them His Spirit that they can obey Him and walk in His commandments. That is the purpose. The new covenant is about God writing His law in the inward parts and on the heart of His people so that they can have circumcised hearts. A circumcised heart, right? Casting off the flesh. Circumcision. Casting off the flesh. The flesh lusts against the Spirit. These things are very common New Testament topics. The flesh lusts against the Spirit, the Spirit against the flesh. Well, it was God's Spirit that is given that we walk in His commandments. The flesh lusts against the Spirit. The flesh wants to disobey God's commandments. But somehow, the prophecy of the new covenant is almost completely disregarded by the modern institutional church. Moreover, they somehow consider there to be a third way. Oh, we're not going to walk in the flesh, we're going to walk in the Spirit. The Spirit has nothing to do with obeying God. That's a disconnect. What is the purpose of Him giving His Spirit? We saw that in Ezekiel repeatedly, that He would give His Spirit that people would obey Him and walk in His commandments, keep them and do them. That is the purpose of it. That is the purpose of a new heart. God wants His people to have a circumcised heart. I know that your local pastor will probably come up with some other story about this. I know that your study Bible will probably give you 4 or 5 verses about why what you just read doesn't mean what you think it means, or maybe it's for somebody else. In the Old Testament, there was one law for the native born and one law, same law for the native born and the stranger who dwelt among them, who said, your God is my God, your people are my people. In the New Testament, there's no distinction between Jew and Gentile. There is one law for all. God is not a respecter of persons. Yet somehow, modern Christianity is going to say, nope, 2 completely different laws for 2 completely different people, 2 completely different reasons for God to give His Spirit. There is now a third way that we can somehow not sin while we're not obeying. And we'll just pretend like what God says about the new covenant, like what God says about giving His Spirit, like what God says in the Old Testament about having a circumcised heart, doesn't matter. Be careful. Study yourself. Look at these passages. Consider the fact that His Word is true from the beginning, and then figure out how those things can be true and how you can apply it to your life. Be blessed. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.